Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for your testimony today. I do want to, I'm going to talk a little bit about, or Mr. Reamer, I want to focus a little bit more on the, as your role with the RSC, your experience there. And I kind of want to, if we could, and maybe, I don't think we were doing the same type of position back in 1976, but what was the impetus behind changing the amount, the donations back in 1976, and then when McCain-Feingold was enacted, why was the limit set to what it was, and was there ever any discussion at that time to raise it with inflation?
It's a great question, Congressman, and I'm not an expert on the legislative history of McCain-Feingold. What I do know is that for some reason the limits were indexed for inflation for everybody but PACs and the state and local parties. I think for PACs now, that's largely a non-issue because we have super PACs and I think PACs have waned in their influence. But for state parties, I have not seen, and I actually, in researching for this hearing, tried to find some rationale for why they would exclude state parties, and maybe Professor Smith knows. But it very well could have been an oversight. I do think overall McCain-Feingold was trying to eliminate what was known as soft money, which was money flowing into the parties that was unregulated. And perhaps that was it, but that doesn't make any sense because they were federal limits and all that money is disclosed and all the money that's raised or spent is disclosed. So I'm honestly not sure.
Well, let me ask you, Professor Smith, I mean, do you have any historical reference to that?
Just a touch more. Yeah, the state party provisions in McCain-Feingold were basically kind of last-minute sorts of things. There was a concern that, oh my gosh, we're putting all these new limits on the national parties and that sort of thing. And, oh, now what will happen? Well, state parties can influence elections for federal office, so maybe we'll try to control them as well. And I just don't think there was much thought given to it. And like on the indexing side, that was a last-minute compromise that worked primarily at that time just on donations to candidate campaigns. So it was just one of those things that was an afterthought because the goal of McCain-Feingold was to basically reduce the amount of political speech. So they weren't thinking about trying to help state parties.
And to that, Mr. Reamer, I'm going to just say again, why is it so important? I have my answer, but I'm going to defer to you on this. Why is it so important that we have, both on the Republican and the Democratic side, why is it so important that we have strong state parties?
Absolutely. There's philosophical reasons, and I think there's concrete reasons. I think, let's go more practical. One, they recruit, nominate, and elect our candidates, and that goes down from school board or county council, let's say, all the way up to president. State parties have an integral role in electing delegates that go to the national convention, who ultimately select the next leader of our country. And so, in many ways, they're sort of the farm team as well. I'm sure lots of members on this committee came up through the local party system, and so it's incredibly important. And I think another thing is we're talking about all these outside groups and super PACs and everything else, but 50 years from now, that super PAC is probably not going to exist, and 50 years from now, that state party is going to exist. So it's permanent, it's always there, and it's not going away.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer, and I would agree with my colleague from Virginia that while the party may still be there, some of our buildings may not be. But let me address you, Mr. Smith, on this. What are some changes you think could strengthen the state and local parties? What are some changes to the laws that you think could strengthen both the state and the local parties?
Well, I appreciate you asking me. It might actually be a better question for Mr. Reimer, but I would say the biggest thing is that currently there's this provision called Levin funds, and local parties are prohibited from engaging in communications that might have the incidental effect of helping federal candidates for office. And it just creates a colossal regulatory burden for state parties to figure out what they can do and to raise and spend money for their own state and local races. If they spend money in their state and local races, but it might influence a federal race, and it will because federal candidates are on the ballot, they get subject to all these regulations.
Mr. Chairman, I want to again thank the witnesses, all the witnesses for your testimony today. It was very insightful. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.